Welcome to the Brother Henry and You Show. I am your host, Henry Harris. Well, don't we have a wonderful series for you? I want to come and talk about communication. Communication is a part of us. It's something that we do with our children, with our loved ones, those who we may be married to, our co-workers, maybe just peers and people out in public. We all communicate. But sometimes it's not as much as what you say as it is how you say it. Because how we communicate can either be effective or it can be in a negative way. These series of messages is not about teaching you how to communicate. You be yourself. However, I want to present maybe a new ideal to you. Maybe a more loving approach. Maybe a more loving tone in how we may present not only ourselves to people, but maybe how we communicate with people on an everyday basis. Today I want to talk to you from the subject, part one, I hear you, but do you? Have you ever had a conversation with someone and they tell you, oh, I hear you. But have you ever thought, do they really hear me, or are they just writing me off, or are they just saying that? Because some people say they hear you, but they really don't. You're saying you hear me, but you really don't hear me. That's what we're going to talk about today as we start these lessons. It has been said that communication is the most important thing in a relationship. Have we all heard that? Communication is the most important thing, and it is. I agree with that. And if it is, what is important about communication? What is important about communication? Some of you may be asking right now, what's so relevant about it? Why is it worth a discussion at the table? Why is it even worth talking about? You know why it's worth a discussion? Because not only communication is important, comprehension is important. So it's not really all about communication. Sometimes it's about comprehension. That's very important. A very good friend of mine says communication is not just simply hearing what someone says. And that's what a lot of people say that they do. They say they hear what you say. But I love what she said. She says, it's not just hearing what someone's saying, but comprehending what someone says. And that word comprehend just simply means to grasp, to apprehend, or to discern. You pretty much graduate, and even that is a choice, to want to understand a person or what someone is saying or how they communicate. We'll get to that here in a second. Getting acquainted, getting to know them. But you have to understand that in order to have effective communication, you have to learn how to comprehend. What is that person trying to say? I didn't understand. Even if that means you reaching out to them saying, hey, I didn't get it. I don't understand it. Ask them. Or at least try to grasp or apprehend or discern what that person is trying to say. Because that is very, very important. One thing I've learned is that communication is an ongoing skill. But not only is communication an ongoing skill, comprehension is an ongoing skill. If we were all honest in some way or another, we could all work on how we communicate with others. If we would just raise our hands and be honest, we haven't all communicated in an effective way. We haven't all communicated in a positive way or in a loving way, but we can make the change today. We can do that today by what? Not only just hearing what someone is saying, but comprehending. That means you grasp, you apprehend, you discern, you take the time to try to understand what that person is saying. I think the greatest gift you can give your companion or the person you're with or a friendship is the ability to not only understand them as a person, but also understand what they are saying. That's what comprehension is all about. The main concept that I have embraced is that it's not as much as what you say, but sometimes how you say it, and sometimes how you communicate with someone, how you talk to someone will be and can be the determining factor if that person will be receptive to what you have to say or your presentation. Have you ever heard that person say that they just don't want to listen to me? Maybe they have a reason not to want to listen to you. I feel like they're not listening at all and they're not paying attention to what I have to say. But, well, how are you talking to them? How are you communicating with them? Sometimes what and how we say things, it does determine if that person will be receptive or will reject what you have to say altogether. This is why it's extremely important to not just hear what someone is saying, but actually taking the time to comprehend what they are saying. That's very important. We should also understand that oftentimes it's not even as much as an issue of communication, even though that's what we're talking about, or even comprehension. Sometimes we have to understand that all of us express ourselves differently. All of us do. And that's what makes me unique. That's what makes you unique. Because you have the right to be you. You have the right to express not only who you are as a person, but also what you believe. Also how you may look at a thing or read a book or whatever the case may be, and you interpret it how you see it. I feel that if we took the time to communicate effectively and to comprehend what someone is saying and also respect where that person is at on their journey and realize that every single person on this planet Earth, we all express ourselves differently, we will have much wonderful world. So we do express ourselves differently. This is where we slow down and we be quiet and we listen. The only way to fully understand how that person expresses themselves, we must take the time to get to know them. And when you take the time to get acquainted with them, comprehension and communication and how they express themselves will not be an issue. It won't be an issue. It won't be an issue at all. You know why? Because not only you're familiar with how they communicate, you also understand every word that they come out of their mouth, you understand it. And that comes based off of you getting acquainted with that person, getting to know that person. And as you get to know them, how they communicate, how they express themselves, it won't be an issue with you anymore. You know why? Because you have gotten acquainted with them. You know them. One may say, well, what does that look like? What does that exactly look like? It simply means that all of us express ourselves differently. No one expresses themselves exactly the same. Just like I don't express myself the way you may express yourself. Just like I don't express myself the way you may express yourself. It also means that how I may express myself, you may not do it the same way. We can't make or control getting someone to hear us. But the reality is they must have a desire to want to. And this means more than telling someone you hear them, but you're actually making the effort. You're taking the time to truly make out what that person is trying to say. I hear you, we hear that a lot, but it means many things to many people. We hear it all the time. I hear you. I hear you. What is it? Is it a cop-out to not to comprehend what that person is saying? Is it a way to end the conversation quickly? It's so easy to write someone off without taking the time to fully process. And that's what we're failing to do. We're failing to fully process what that person is saying. Here's a quote that one of my friends said. People will start talking and assuming before they even have an understanding. Presumption shows ignorance and arrogance. Heather Ann. I love that quote because presumption leads to ignorance. One of my friends always says ignorance is not just not knowing, but it also means not noticing. I often wonder that when we communicate with people, no matter who that may be, our loved ones, co-workers, do we presume? How often do we presume? I've done it before. Have you done it before? Do we not realize that assumption leads to ignorance and arrogance? When we assume that we know something when in reality you really don't know, maybe that's the prideful side of us that don't want to ask. We assume we know things. Some people assume that they know everything or all things. It leads to ignorance and arrogance when you assume, when you presume things. The reality is everyone communicates differently. But it is up to us to put forth the effort to not only hear what they're saying, but comprehend what they are saying. I believe the overall focus is not just communication, but comprehension. They work together. They work hand in hand. Did you know that? Communication and comprehension work together. If we really took the time to comprehend, it would make communication much more effective. But as I said earlier, it's an effort. It's something that you have to do. You can stay in that world where you think you know it all and you understand what everybody is saying, or you make assumptions all the time. I think it's time that we develop a better way, a better path. I'm talking about communication now. Take the time to listen to that person, to understand them. Perhaps you may be watching and you may be saying, well, Henry, what are some ways to comprehend what someone is saying? Well, let's talk about that. We're going to discuss some ways we can comprehend what someone is saying, right? Okay, we're going to get 3 ways how to comprehend. There are 3 ways to comprehend. Number 1, don't make quick assumptions. Don't make quick assumptions. Because let me tell you something. When you make quick assumptions, that just tells me that you're not even trying to understand what that person is saying. You should never assume, because if you really don't know, just say so. Say, I don't know. I read something that you said. I can't comprehend it. But don't assume. That's not good. But just don't assume. Number two, another way to comprehend. Number two, listen closely. Listen closely. When you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with someone, even if it's a friend, don't just hear what they're saying, but comprehend what they're saying. And another way you can comprehend is not only not making quick judgments and quick assumptions of what you think they're saying, but actually listen closely. Give them your full attention. Number three, I really like this one. Number three, decoding. Decoding. That word decoding just simply means untangle, unravel, interpret. So when you sit down with someone, start to decode and unravel and untangle. It's like if you have a rope and you want to use that rope to jump rope or something like that, and the rope is all tangled up. Well, you can't really jump rope if the rope is all tangled up. It's not effective. Communication is the same way. You have to untie that rope. You have to unravel it, untangle it. You have to decode it. You have to figure it out. We have to do that same way as it relates to communication as well. Try to sit down and interpret, break it down, decode if you have to what this person is trying to say. And don't be afraid to ask. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. Don't be afraid to ask someone. I've had people ask me, even here recently with some of my posts, Henry, what do you mean? I didn't understand that. And that makes me honor that person so much more rather than making assumptions, oh, this is what he said. Because sometimes people will say what they think you're saying when in reality, that's not what you're saying at all. Number four, this is a real big one here. Number four, be open-minded. Be open-minded. Don't just shut yourself down. Well, I'm not going to listen to anybody else, and I'm not going to hear what anybody else say. Because you know what? You will never grow with that attitude. You won't. You'll never grow with that attitude. We're all learning. We're all growing. We're all developing in some way. All of us are. There's something about each and every one of us that we can learn, even as it relates to communication. Sometimes it's hard to understand what people say. We expect everyone to understand us or our presentation, our message. But it's not always easy. But it's not always that easy. The important thing is to take the time to understand. Communication, and we're going to go into part two of our series on communication. Today we're going to discuss some unhealthy communication habits. You know, I can say that I've been there at one time. I'm sure you've been there at one time. Had some communication, had some unhealthy communication habits that maybe you were aware of, maybe you weren't aware of. But I think that this is something that's very important and something that needs to be brought to the table. It needs to be discussed because so many people today have some very mean-spirited, toxic, unhealthy communication habits that they do not realize that it is detrimental and destroying the connections that they have with people. You have heard me say this in the last segment, that sometimes it's not what you say, sometimes it is how you say it. But what if what you say is interpreted wrong? Many of us have been there before. We've said something and somebody interpreted it a certain way, and you go back and look at it and you're like, no, that ain't what I mean. They interpreted what you said was wrong. How do we balance? How do we balance not only what we say, but how we say it? Now, we can't control how others may not only perceive us, but also their perception of what we say. We can only control how we say it. There are two levels of communication. And you that are watching right now, you fall into either one of these categories. You have healthy communication or you have unhealthy communication. It's just like that. Two levels. Your communication is either healthy or unhealthy. But hopefully before this segment is over with, you'll be able to identify what category you fall under. I often wonder if we take the time to evaluate how we communicate to others. Have you ever sat back and asked yourself, how do I'll write it right here, how do I talk to others? Hey, have you ever asked yourself that question? How do I talk to others? Have we taken a mental picture that when we're sitting down, we're talking to the wife or the husband or the friend or the boss? Have we literally sat down and evaluated and say, how am I communicating with them? How am I talking to them? Have you taken the time to discern if your communication traits are healthy or unhealthy? Have you taken the time to actually listen to yourself? For it's only when you listen to yourself is when you'll be able to decide or determine if your communication is healthy or unhealthy. The answer is not only listening, but the answer is also recognition. Wow, recognition. The ability to not only look at my toxic, unhealthy communication traits and recognizing it, but not only that, fixing it. I've done it before. I'm sure you have too. You recognize it. Recognition goes with both of them. You can either recognize that I don't think there's anything wrong with my communication. And if there's not, that's fine. But you may be another person that's watching, you know what? I think my communication is not real good. It all starts with listening and recognition. Listen and recognition. That's very listening and recognition. Sometimes how we speak to others will determine if they will be receptive or not. You have to recognize it. That simply means asking yourself, is my communication habits toxic? But not only that, but taking the time to fix it. Now, some will respond in offense and say, well, I'm okay. I'm not changing my tone. Have you heard people say that? I am who I am and I'm not going to accommodate to anyone. And may I ask, could that be your overall problem? That you're unwilling to accommodate because you have become comfortable with your toxic communication traits or habits? Have we literally become comfortable with how we talk to others while all along wondering how come nobody wants to date me? How come nobody wants to marry me? How come nobody wants to deal with me? How come nobody wants to be around me? Could it just be that having that attitude could be the very reason why many people detach themselves from you? We see no need of changing at all. We think we're okay in terms of how we communicate with others, but you can't see that your unhealthy communication habits have destroyed several of your friendships, several of your relationships, And I think the reality is you're not even trying to see. Leads to this question. Are you even trying to see? Are you even trying to see it? Some people are not trying to see it. I am who I am and I ain't changing. How's that working for you? How's that working for you? Because we're living in a time now where people are just not going to tolerate it. They're just not going to tolerate it. I know this attitude all too well, people. I know this attitude all too well. We can't control how one may perceive us, but we can control how we speak to others. So many people have unhealthy communication habits and they don't see it. And some people have unhealthy communication habits and they do see it and don't want to do nothing about it. I want to help you to see it. That's all I want to do. I want to help you to see it. I want you to help you to listen to yourself, how you communicate with. I want to help you to recognize it, become aware of it, and do something about it. Only you can do it. Nobody can do it for you. Only you can do it. I want to help you to recognize it. Let's keep in mind that we are all a work in progress as it relates to communication. I'm not saying tomorrow, bam, you're going to just be so perfect in your communication skills. I'm not saying that. I still work on my communication. I still have my days where I say things I shouldn't say, do things that I shouldn't do. All of us have been there. But we're growing, we're developing, we want to get better when we recognize it and when we see it. That's where you should give yourself a pat on the back. I see it, I recognize it, I want to make a change. Because not only is it hurting me, it's hurting the people that are around me. It's hurting friendships, it's hurting potential relationships that I could have. There is another reality we must confront, and that is, what if my communication is misconstrued as unhealthy when in actuality it is healthy? Now, that's not your problem. Whoever is misconstruing it, that's their problem. Your communication and how you speak and how you talk, there may be nothing wrong with it at all, but they may misinterpret it and misconstrue it that way. If they see it that way, and I'm not trying to sound insensitive, that's their issue. That's their problem. In those instances, do not accommodate. In those instances, do not change for them. That's who you are. You're not hurting no one with your language. You're not trying to destroy anyone with your language. You're not unhealthy. You don't have no unhealthy communication habits. Don't change for them. Because you cannot control how they see you and what you say. It happens all the time. Well, if this were to happen, do we realize that if what you say is interpreted wrongly, that's their problem, not yours? You will have those who may interpret what you say wrongly. It may have never been your intentions to harm someone with your communication, but they may take it that way. Have you ever said something to someone and you're like, and they get offended or whatnot, but your intentions, you weren't even trying to hurt them or harm them, but they just took it that way. All about what we talked about in the last segment. Not only communication, but comprehending what that person said, getting acquainted with them. This ceases to be a problem if you know you have healthy communication habits and for whatever reason they aren't getting it. And you're going to run into those people in life. They just will not get it. The problem is probably more with the person who is being misunderstanding. It's probably with that person who misunderstood you and not you. It's probably them that needs to make the change, not you. You can't help or control how one takes you. it's not your fault that they don't understand you or how you communicate things. But the important note is, what are some unhealthy communication habits? What are some of those? Can we talk about that? Well, number one, some unhealthy communication habits, we have constantly interrupting. There's nothing more irritating than trying to communicate with someone who feels the need to either interrupt you or talk over you. This also demonstrates that they aren't really listening to you. Be quiet and let the other person talk. You will have your turn. Interruption is rude and it diminishes the other person that's speaking. That may sound harsh, but I'm not trying to be harsh with you today. I can't stand it. I know me, I've been in relationships with people where you try to talk to them, blah, 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 they don't give you time to say nothing, blah, 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 blah. It's like you're not even listening. You're not even, there's been some instances where I just gave up and said, okay, you just talk all by yourself. I'm not an argumentative person. I'm not going to argue, but there's been times in my life, in relationships and friendships, constantly interrupting. You can say what you want to say, but give that person time to say what they want to say as well. It's rude. It's disrespectful. Sometimes we have to just be quiet, just shut these up and listen to the other person. Number two, yelling is another one. Yelling and bickering. Yelling and bickering is another unhealthy habit that many people have as it relates to communication. Yelling at someone, we all have probably done it. Have I done it? Yes. I've done it. And we can agree that the very thought is very immature, but many have their reasons why they do it. But the reality is it is very disrespectful. And secondly, feeling the need to yell shuts, oh boy, I don't know if y'all ready to hear this. Having the need or feeling the need to yell at someone, I don't care if that's your husband, your wife, your friend, whoever it is, it literally shuts the hearer down. It shuts the hearer down. Because when you start yelling, they shut down. I've had that happen to me. Screaming at me like for no reason. You know what? And they want, well, how come he won't listen? I shut down. I shut down. That's not effective communication. Yelling back and forth. See, when you're yelling back and forth, that's irrelevant. And nobody's really listening to each other. Because you're going back and forth. You just yelling. It's like, at the end of the day, ask yourself, what does that serve? Trying to demonstrate how powerful you are? I can yell. Well, maybe if I yell, I'll get their attention. You're not going to get their attention. They shut down. The hearer shuts down when you start to yell. Number three, never assume. We talked about this in the last show. Assumption. Do you remember what I said assumption leads to? Ignorance. And what was the other one? Arrogance. It leads to that. Assumptions is exactly that. Assumptions. It's exactly what it is, assumptions. The definition of assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. You don't have proof, you're just assuming. Oftentimes when we communicate with someone, we make up assumptions or may think we understand the person or their conversation, but the reality is we don't always know. So that's why it's important to never assume without proof. So what's the last one? Discredit or discounting someone else's experiences. This happens all too often where we discredit or discount someone else's experiences. And when it comes to communication, we should never try to dismantle someone else's experience. I think overall this is the worst. We do it a lot. We do it. Someone says something, you're listening to them, and you try to make them or convince them to believe that what they experienced never happened. Who are you to say to them what they didn't experience or what they didn't encounter? Accept that that's true. If they said they went through that or they were a drug addict or whatever the case may be, unless they're lying. But for the most part, many people are not. They're just genuinely and authentically sharing their experiences. And you do not have the right to discredit, to discount, or even dismantle their experience. You know why? Because you didn't live it. You weren't there. You didn't go through it. These are just a few, but always keep in mind how we communicate with others determines how they will receive it. Today, we need to take a minute to evaluate, like I talked about earlier. Examine some of the unhealthy traits. And not only that, making the necessary corrections.
We hope you have enjoyed today's program. We want to connect with you. Visit us at facebook.com/The Brother Henry and You Show, or visit us on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Henry Harris 100. We're so grateful you tuned in today and hope you have a fantastic day.